Welcome to today's show at Manufacturing Talk Radio. We have our usual guest, Mr. Tim Fiore from the ISM, giving us the latest manufacturing report. Tim, why don't you take it from here?
Thanks, Lou. Lou is the president of All Metals and Forge Group, a manufacturer of open die forgings and seamless rolled rings, and the sponsor for Manufacturing Talk Radio, which makes it possible for us to do this live podcast today and another live broadcast on Friday with Anthony Nieves as we talk about the services report on business. Today, we're going to talk about the manufacturing report on business, strong report. We welcome Tim Fiore to the show, who is the committee chair for the manufacturing report on business. Tim, thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here. Another great manufacturing month. It's feeling good. I earned that. I'm going to earn that yellow jacket. You guys owe me a yellow jacket.
We're working on it.
We'll have to get your size and send that over to us, and we'll get you in a yellow jacket. Tim, the number continues to remain very strong. For those of you who are not familiar with the Purchasing Managers Index number, it is above 50, which means we're in expansion. Anything above 50 is an expansion. And I'll let Tim Fiore give you the details on what that means. Tim?
Right. So for your listeners, if they've listened to the show before, I really look at this thing from three standpoints: demand, consumption, and inputs. So the demand side did really well again. We had an over 66 new order number, supported by a new export order number of about 56, which is about 1 point up from the prior month, which is good. The new export order side has been relatively weak compared to the new order number in the U.S. We're near record backlogs yet again, second highest number since we started keeping records back in the 90s. And our customer inventory number, which is an indication of how much inventory that we make our customer has on their shelves, is below 40 again for like the 14th straight month. So exceptionally strong demand remains. One caveat is that there could be a little bit of artificial demand in there because lead times are now at record lengths for raw material. Prices are continuing to go up, but not as fast a rate, but it could be leading buyers to place orders well in advance of a reasonable amount of realistic risk. So we could be in that environment now where some of this new order level is what I would call almost like artificial, maybe 2 or 3x outside of what a normal lead time would be. So demand was really good. And let's kind of stop on that and chat a bit about demand.
Yeah, no doubt. And you're going to go through the inputs and outputs for us as you go through this report. Tim, I know that demand is a real good thing, but it is creating some significant, what used to be ripples, now are waves in the economy. Why don't you give us a little depth on what's happening and some things that you've heard from your participants to the survey?
Right. So let's look at it from an industry standpoint. Number one industry sector, computer electronics, expanding demand again, and think low to medium 70s. Really good number. New export orders above 60. Really good. We had a little bit of a slackening in demand on the chemical side, but we're still above 60, which is I'm not really concerned about that. I think we need to spend some time talking about IDA and what that's going to mean for the September report. Transportation sector, we're still running high 50s, really good. If you've been into an auto dealership recently, there's no inventory, there's none. And that's all pent up demand because, cars get miles on them. People still are not commuting to work, but they're putting miles on their cars. If you travel down any of the interstates are packed. So the miles are there and the cars to replenish them are not. So that's going to represent future demand for us, which is really good. One of the interesting industry sectors this month was food and beverage. We had a really contraction on the employment side. And of all the big 6 industry sectors, I'm going to say food and beverage is probably the highest employer of the 6. So we'll talk a bit about that when we get into consumption. But the demand levels still remain high, mid 60s. And we had a fall off a bit on fabricated metal products, about 5 points, maybe 20% from the prior month's new order level. But all in all, new order levels are really, really good.
With all the good, and I don't want to be the naysayer guy in the crowd here, but the more orders we're seeing, the more difficult it is to deliver it because of truckers, trucking, truck drivers, containers, ships. All these are fairly negative influences. You want to touch base on that because it's all related to the same thing. It's great that we have new orders. It's great we've got great backlog, but if I can't ship it, tell me what to do, doctor.
That's just a timing issue. If you can't look, you're going to look at, can you ship it or do you have demand? I mean, they're not even in the same class. You're talking about carrying a little bit more inventory for a couple of days, big deal. And maybe paying a few extra cents on a per ton transport. What about no demand? It starts with demand. We got demand, perfect. But we are. Let me give you some numbers here on. I'll give you some numbers on transportation, and I'll also give you some numbers here on lead times and supplier deliveries. Because we should probably get into now the input side, because the output side, I think, is a result of all of this. When you got demand, fine. So everything has to align around it. So on the supplier delivery comments, which from the standpoint of freight issues, we ran 37% freight issues in August, 36 in July, 38 in June. So you're right. It hasn't gotten much better. No doubt about that. Lead times are actually extending out. In June, 13%, 14% in July, 17% in August. So the lead time effect is still driving more new orders than I kind of would really like. But I think the biggest, the nicest number in here is supplier deliveries. Shortages. So in the supplier delivery section, shortage comments went from 56% in May to 38% in June, 33% in July, 29% in August. So that kind of says, and that supports the supplier delivery number, that things are getting a little bit better. They're getting a little bit better. You're not seeing this big revolutionary jump, but you're seeing an easing on the input side because suppliers are kind of catching up.
No, that's good news. And by the way, I just want to remind our viewers that you can watch this show at ismworld.org. This live broadcast today, the one on Friday, will be at that website, ismworld.org. We appreciate you tuning in. Tim, if the suppliers are catching up, what are we looking at for September? What have we seen? And I know you just went over this a bit. In July and August, are they feeling confident that this can continue, or are they going to get nipped in the bud from something we haven't seen yet?
Well, I think the port issues are continuing. Port issues are not going to get resolved until the end of the Lunar New Year. We're probably talking March. We're now overwhelmed with ports, primarily from the standpoint of the LA ports. You saw the stuff in the news, 44 cargo vessels offshore waiting to unload. That's a big number. That's bigger than it was right after the pandemic kind of shut everything down. So, and that discontinuity in the port situation is only getting exacerbated by the Delta variant running through Southeast Asia. We talked about that last month. A lot of chip manufacturing, some raw materials, rubbers and stuff are coming out of Malaysia, Indonesia, and it's hurt. The ports are jammed up. I think the biggest headwind that we have right now remains the labor issue, and maybe not even so much on the supplier side, more on the panelist company side. You see, so we'll kind of jump here to, let's jump to, before I leave the input side, inventory count number came up to 55. My first reaction was, well, okay, suppliers are delivering more, which is good. They're growing the inventory count. Well, there's actually a couple of factors in there. That is not really a raw material inventory count. That's a manufacturing inventory count. It consists of three elements: raw material, which by far is normally the highest, think 65, 70% of the total, work in progress, which is probably 15, 20%, and then finished goods, stuff getting ready to be shipped to the customer. At this point in time, when the customer inventory level is so low, you got to figure finished goods inventory is zero. As soon as it's made, except for waiting for those trucks to come up to pick the stuff up, it's gone. So, but we do have a lot of parts being semi-finished products being semi-finished because they don't have all the parts. You can see the pictures you can see this really in any kind of discrete manufacturing. You'll see it in machinery. You'll see it in fabricated metal products. You'll see it in computer and electronics. You'll see it in transportation equipment. You won't see it in chemicals. You won't see it in refined products because that's continuous manufacturing. But anywhere where it's discrete, one or two parts prevents you from finishing the product. But if you go ahead and put it into work in progress and make 95% of it, at least you're absorbing overhead and you're not killing your P&L. So that's what people are doing. They're making as much of the product that they can, and they're putting it aside, waiting for the critical parts to show up. And I think the definition in our inventory account is manufacturing inventory, including work in progress. So I think you're seeing some of that contributing to that 55 kind of number. But overall, outside of those discrete part shortages, which are not going to go away in the short term, we're going to continue to fight this stuff. And Hurricane Ida is going to have an impact, clearly on the plastic sector that we'll talk about later. The biggest issue still remains employment. We're contracting again. We've been going 48 to 52, 48 to 52. We need to get to a 56, 58, and that will unlock that production number to a 65, 68, like we had in the last manufacturing expansion cycle. We saw 60 employment numbers, we saw 65, 68 production numbers. We're not seeing them in this expansion cycle, pretty much, 14 months in. So the biggest issue is still returning to work.
Let me ask a question. One of my long build-up questions to get to the real question. Things are going along good. Economy's up. Manufacturing is up. All the numbers are great. They're up into the 60s, certainly the high 50s. And unemployment is, we still don't have enough people. And all the points that you just brought up on the negative side, somewhere along the line, my instincts tell me that if you have all these good things and you have all these bad things, isn't there going to be a clashing of worlds at some point that it's got to have an effect, probably on a downward aspect in terms of the economy, the manufacturing economy? Or am I just overthinking this?
Well, we're highly cyclic. That's what makes the manufacturing economy really predictive of the general economy. We're early and we're highly cyclic. So you can see the definition month to month, and we precede the service economy. So that's the advantage of manufacturing. I've been talking about it this morning. We're about 14 months into this expansion. You guys remember that the typical expansion, when we've had 5 of them outside of this one since 2000, they average 35 to 38 months. So if you look at it from that standpoint, we're not even halfway through this expansion. There's a lot of factors that are at play here that are holding us back of achieving even higher peaks. But running almost 60, we're running across the top here at really strong levels. On the employment side, we because I track the initial jobless claims week to week. But when I get ready for this report, I look, what was the initial jobless claim when I reported last versus today? And I don't really look at the initial jobless claims. I look at the continuing claims. We're 1.3 million people back to work or off the jobless rolls since the end of July. So, I think that's really positive. Now that means, and I think July to June, it was 1.1. So right now we're sitting at 12 million on the total unemployment comp rolls. And I guess you could argue some of those fell off and never to come back from again.
Right.
We should talk a little bit we'll talk about turnover when we get into the output consumption side. But I think more and more people are getting back into the work environment. You can see it on the supplier delivery side. The fact that kids went back to school in mid to late August and definitely in September will be definitely a tailwind for employment. The fact that the enhanced unemployment claims at this point at least will run out at the end of September should be very positive for September and October. I think we've already peaked on the Delta variant. I think, and the hype on that is just unbelievable. It's unbelievable, and at this point, I'm not sure what to believe. But it is unbelievable. And the good thing is, though, is that we're not shutting things down. We're having sporadic. But then back on the virus, I mean, it's definitely impacting Southeast Asia because they don't have the medical systems that we do. And they're shutting factories down. That's one of the big reasons why we have so much chip shortages right now. Malaysia is a big contributor, as I think was out in the news last week. But I've been living it in my other job for the last couple of months.
Jim, let's talk about, just kind of off the subject, but not too far off the subject. You're with the ISM as the committee chair, but you also work with Ryder Transportation. How is Ryder doing? The demand has got to be incredibly high.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, no comment. We're consistent with the transportation sector. It's a fun time though to be in. It's a fun time to be in business in all levels.
Yeah, I'll bet it is. I'll bet it is. So let's
I'm
talk
gonna have to
about-
write that one down.
May you live in interesting times. We're there, folks.
Yeah, right.
Let's talk about the output side of the equation. Tim.
Yeah. So, production numbers really strong, no doubt. Employment numbers contracting slightly. Again, we've been dithering back and forth on that. That's the big holdback. We got to get people back to the factories. The big war is really in that low to moderate cost per hour labor force. It's not the high skilled labor force. They're most likely loyal to the companies unless you have concentration of industries in certain metropolitan areas. A senior person making a complicated product, making a really good wage, isn't going to jump to competition. It's just not going to be that way. Right. Did I give you the numbers here on employment already? I don't think I did, right? Okay, so on the employment side, we had an 8-to-1 positive hire to force manage ratio. Now remember that force manage ratio includes furloughs, layoffs, and attrition and hiring freezes. We still have 8 companies hiring versus 1 in one of those buckets. Now that's down from 13-to-1, but frankly, there's a little bit of a fatigue here happening. It's almost like tariffs. Remember, when tariffs first came out, everybody talked about them. Halfway through, we kind of talked a little bit about them, but we learned to deal with them. And that's what really the client company is doing now. So an 8-to-1, 13-to-1, it's pretty much the same. 81% of our comments were hire comments and all of the employment sector, hiring, not getting, and that's different from where we were in March and April of last year. Of those comments, 35% of those were people specifically saying they were having trouble. And that number is up 5 points from last month. So we're still having difficulty at the panelist company. But the most significant thing I think that happened on employment in the month of August was that if you count turnover and retirements, 25% of the comments mention retirements and turnovers. And that, if you remove the retirement piece out, and that retirement could really be turnover. That could be somebody retiring because they've been 20 years and going to work for somebody else. Right. It's really wage chasing is what's happening. By far the biggest piece of that is turnover specific, not retirements. People are chasing wages, and wages are a local issue. And if you're trying to hire people, you're going to offer an extra 25 cents, another 50 cents. If you've only worked for that company for 3, 4, 5 years, you might leave. And then you're in this whole do loop of having to rehire, raise your wages, and steal somebody from the guy who sold your guy. So we're in this merry-go-round loop that hopefully has got to end. And I think take the artificial constraints away, get that other 4 to 6 million of people who are still on the sidelines back into the workforce, stop the enhanced unemployment, get kids back into school so people don't have to worry about their kids during the daytime, stop the rental support, because how does that contribute to your ability to stand unemployment? Probably does. And let's get back to a more even playing field.
Yeah, no doubt, Lou.
Meanwhile, there are manufacturers out there and companies, stores, even retail, where you see, we're hiring and paying bonuses, sign-on bonuses, $500. I saw in a restaurant that I went into that they were offering a $300 bonus for a water boy in a restaurant. So there are still people out there who are maybe enjoying this respite of unemployment and getting paid for it. And maybe Washington overthought this at the time as to when they should end this.
Well, we've talked about that. Remember when it got extended in March for as long as it did it really need to go out there? Why didn't they just do 3 months rather than 6? And that's, but if you're out there in the economy, and I know you guys are, you go into a restaurant, I feel really bad for the servers because they're overworked and they're also cleaning their own tables, like you said. You go into the hotels and there's no more rooms, there's no more service in your room. You have to ask specifically for it. Not all the rooms are available. Again, it's that low to moderate cost labor where we're having trouble getting people in. So when you're making enhanced unemployment, that's a competitive factor. You go into any of the grocery stores, I was shocked. I mean, I just recently ended up here in southern New England, and my wife and I have been out in the furniture stores, the grocery stores, the department stores, and the shelves there's holes in the shelves. I talked to a guy who was stocking shelves in the grocery store. He told me it's been this way for over a month, which means that either it's a transportation issue, but grocery stores have pretty much dedicated kind of lanes because they got to move material all the time. It's inbound manufactured food that they're struggling with. Go into the frozen food cases, big holes on the shelves where it's prepackaged and sent in, big holes. So and like I said, you can't get a car inside of 6 months. So this is all indicative of the fact that we have this competition for labor. There's still 4 to 6 million people not working that were working pre-pandemic. But I think I'm pretty confident that we're going to solve a big part of it by the time we get to the end of the year. But I'm also of the belief this month compared to last month that the continuing evolving of these variants is going to continue to be obstacles for us for the next year and a half.
Well, you just answered my next question. I was going to ask you, we're in the middle of a cycle. We're 18 months, everything's beginning to look better and better, except for the COVID numbers. And so if we're in the middle, I was going to ask you, is there any real downside coming? And obviously, if we're in the middle, we still have a good year and a half more to go where things are improving. But I'm going to come back to this other thing about availability of labor, availability of logistics, and so on and so forth. And I'm going to bring up that point where worlds collide again. Do you think that because we're going through something that in my career, I have never seen in business. I've never seen what's going on. We've seen good numbers, but we have never seen a good number based on the fact that we've had so many bad things happening, like the COVID, like the trucking is a situation, shipping issues, and so on. So I'm a little confused. I don't know about our listeners, but I'm not clear on where this really is going to go. Is it really going to go 18 months? And I know you're not a magician, so you don't really know the perfect answer, but could this collapse by the spring?
No, I don't. Why would you think that? I mean, we ran out of steam in that last expansion, the Obama-Trump expansion. We ran out of steam in large part because of tariffs. I mean, the tariff headwinds kind of slowed everything down. We were slowing down before the pandemic. You know that. We were in contraction territory 6 months before the pandemic.
But we still have the tariffs.
We still have them, and they're definitely causing issues, definitely on the steel side. I mean, we're at almost $2,000 a short ton now for steel. That is ridiculous.
Unbelievable.
And that's not going back to 650 outside of a recession. So we're stuck with that, and so, but I think the two biggest issues that we have here is the fact that we're going to continue to have this virus mutate. We're going to continue to have an unacceptable amount of Americans who are not vaccinated. So we're going to have to continue to deal with this thing, and it's going to end up in unplanned absenteeism, and absenteeism that exceeds what we are normally used to, which means we need to hire more people. And that's a 2 to 3 year issue. No doubt about it. So where do we get, and if the battle is here at the low labor cost, moderate labor costs, where do we get those people from? You've got an aging population, retiring out. I mean, it's my generation on the tail end of the baby boomers. We're still around. We're retiring out. Somebody has to take our spot. So I think we need more liberal immigration policies to allow more, because that's always what has made America great. We expand our population 2 to 3% a year. It's just coincidental that equals GDP. So without the people coming in to take the jobs, what are you going to do? The second thing we're going to have is this thing is not going to leave the global economy inside of 3 to 5 years. I don't see it. A whole bunch of pharma companies making vaccine capabilities, but just think of the logistical nightmare of vaccinating 6.5 billion people. I mean, I just can't get my head wrapped around that. That's a 3 to 5 year deal, and you're going to have that thing burn up like it's doing in Malaysia right now. Next month, It's going to be Brazil, or a month after that, it's going to be the copper mines in Chile. I mean, it's just going to continue to move around. And, so that's what we're faced with. We're faced with, continuing absenteeism, requiring more labor headcount per output of work, and global supply chains that are going to be reluctant to resource stuff into higher labor cost countries where maybe the risk is less of a pandemic breakout, and they're going to struggle with intermittent shortages and outages of product from all over the world. And that's reality for manufacturing for the next 3 to 5 years.
I'd like to just bring up one point that you brought up about immigration, and we don't have enough time for this show, but I would like to make a mental note for us that perhaps our next show, let's have a conversation about a more liberal and sensible immigration policy, because we're running out of people. And if we don't start training new people, and you're not going to be training the millennials to do the work that immigrants do, and even technical immigrants that know how to manufacture and so on. So I'd like to just put that mental note in for us, and as well as our listeners, for us to have a conversation about the immigration issue.
Okay. Yeah, there just needs to be a little bit of research. I mean, I think the whole thing here too around the census is very interesting. I've seen the drafts on, the evolving of the U.S. population. Really interesting stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
Really interesting stuff.
Save it for our next show.
All right. So, but there's so much to talk about in manufacturing. We may not get to it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Tim, the other thing I want to close on as we wrap this up is imports and inventories over the next 2 months, because orders for the holiday season, which is upcoming, were placed earlier this year, and September and October are the 2 big months where those volumes have to move through the supply chain. I would expect, and maybe you can share with our listeners what you expect on what's going to happen. I mean, the import number may go up, but it's like pushing a pig through a python at this point.
Well, and a lot of that product that comes in is manufactured outside the U.S. and it's ready for sale once it gets to the stores. It doesn't come in semi-finished and it gets finished here. I would think right now those things have the priority at the ports. Unfortunately, because in the case of the holiday season, there's no such thing as pent-up demand. You either make the season or you don't. And you guys know the history has always been in retail that 60% of the entire annual sales volume is around that holiday season. So I'm sure there's a lot of forces at play within the ports to prioritize that kind of stuff. I don't think they're in trouble yet. With 44 ships off the coast of California, that's got to be concerning, because I think that number is the highest I've heard since this whole pandemic hit. And it's probably a confluence of everything happening at once and us hitting the peak season here for holidays. So yeah, hey, it's a great time to be in manufacturing again. It's that we get challenged every darn day, and we got people out there doing yeoman's work to meet the company's revenue. And I heard something yesterday, as we have talked about on this show for the last couple of months. Profitability of the Fortune 500 was going to be very good Q2. Well, that's exactly what's happened. I think I saw a number that 90% of the Fortune 500 exceeded expectations. It was some outlandish number, 70 to 90 or something, really high. And I expect that we're going to do the same thing here in Q3. The big question will be Q4, and can we continue to push those price increases through? And then the question then becomes, has the wages gotten high enough for people to be able to pay for those increases? And then you're in that big wheel, which we need to get to, I guess, because we're going to be shoving price increases through. I don't know if I mentioned, but our price increase number is coming down from a standpoint of growth, which is probably a good way to end this. So, in the month of June, we kind of peaked out. 85% of our respondents said they were paying more for their products, their input costs. And since our panelists are at all levels of the supply chain, we had talked about it back then, that means everybody is passing through higher prices. In July, we got to 74%, down from 85. And now in August, we're at 63%. So that's kind of a good sign that we're starting to see, outside of steel, we're starting to see an easing here on the price increases.
Yeah.
Probably the last thing to leave the conversation with here is IDA. Did we talk about IDA?
Be our guest.
Yeah, we did
so
that.
my biggest concern about IDA is disruption in the supply channels for plastics and basic chemicals, because not even so much refined products, petroleum products, fuels and oil and stuff, more about the plastics, because plastics have been disrupted in chemicals since the freeze in February. We've been making headway in the last couple of months. You'll notice in our report that we don't have as many plastics noted as short and up in price. So we're getting really close to getting to a proper equilibrium with plastics. But you know, this hurricane, the good thing about this hurricane is it moved quickly. It didn't linger around long and it went through.
Yeah, it moved so quickly that they're now sending out alert notices here in Fairfield, New Jersey about our rivers flooding tomorrow.
Yeah, well, that's right. We're getting it here in Connecticut too, but
Yeah,
it didn't hang around over the refineries and the petrochemical facilities, and that's good. But we probably lost 5 to 7 days of production at a point in time where we couldn't afford to lose the production.
Right.
So, so that's going to be a problem for September. I think supplier delivery number is going to go up again, primarily because of the hurricane. When I first took this job back in 2017, about 4 months in, we had a hurricane that hit Texas and the Gulf Coast, and supplier delivery number jumped up to like 80, and all kinds of other things happened that were not positive. And I had to explain that, well, it's not negative either. I mean, it's a one-time event that's going to go away. We're probably going to see some of that in September, but hopefully no more hurricanes headed to the Gulf this year.
Hopefully so. Tim?
Yes. Well, Tim, we appreciate you sharing more detail in this report, and we encourage people to go to ismworld.org, where we have been broadcasting live, which we will do again on Friday at 12 noon Eastern time. Thanks for Tim for being with us on this episode of the Manufacturing Talk Radio.
Yeah, good to be here, guys. Thanks very much. See you next month.
Take care now. Good job. Yellow jacket coming.
Yellow jacket coming. I'm looking for that yellow jacket.
Oh, great.
Oh, maybe by then I'll get down to a large.
Okay. All right. No comment on that either, huh?
Yeah, no comment on that. Thanks.
Thank you again.
Lou, that wraps us up. We want to thank all of our viewers and listeners to pay attention to the live shows that we have coming up again on Friday for the services report. And as always, thank you for being with us on this episode of Manufacturing Talk Radio.
You take care. Okay, we're out. We're out.
Are we still live?
I'm